Bonjour. Hello. Hark. For we was once lost in the dark, not an absence of the light, but an absence of those who were bright. We've let kings rule, while the peasants day drool. We were once so lost, aye, we did have to pay the heavy cost. But we bid farewell when man began to think, aye, in the darkness she began to sink. Farewell, entitlement. Hello, enlightenment. So government, we're going to be talking about enlightenment specifically. Early enlightenment, pre-America existing. Government is an institution created by a group or collection of people in order to create a society bound by specific rules and regulations. Well, why was this done? Why was there this government brought together? And here are some reasons: protection, order, conflict resolution, economic stability, public services. But a lot of these ideas came about during the period of Enlightenment. So let's find out what Enlightenment is. It was an intellectual movement that applied reason to all forms of human activity. Or you could also call it a philosophic movement of the 18th century, marked by a rejection of traditional social, religious, and political ideas with an emphasis on rationalism. That's the Webster's definition. Also known as the Age of Reason. So let's find out, when did this start and what started this? I pity the fool! It began in the 1600s and lasted well into the 1700s. It started as a result of the scientific revolution, which was in the 15 to 1600s. Man began to come out of the Dark Ages, or European Dark Ages, and we began to look at the reasons of why things happened. Why do the sun come up? Why does the moon change sizes? Why does the tides move? Looked at why does our bodies act the way they do, and they began looking at cells and all sorts of things. Through the scientific revolution, man began studying nature around him. Well, people eventually started saying, hey, well, they're using all this reason to science and nature. Well, maybe we should apply this rational thought to social issues and how man interacts with one another. And you come up with some things known as natural rights, rights that belong to all people because they are rational thinking beings. Most notably, we tend to say here life, liberty, and happiness. But originally it was life, liberty, and property. Happiness was stuck in there later on for specific reasons, so that it was kind of a thing so that people couldn't argue they had the right to own other people, slavery and so forth. So it was switched that we have the right to seek life, liberty, and happiness instead of property. Alright, so let's look at a few of the people of these philosophers of these Enlightenment, these Renaissance. In 1596 to 1650, Rene Descartes lived. He was a French philosopher. And he said doubt would help people to better understand the world and avoid the traps of superstition and tradition. So if I doubt what's happening, I'm going to look more into it. Like if you doubt somebody's telling you the truth, well, you're going to look it up. You're going to go try to find out. So that this doubt would help us break these superstitions and these traditions that had been set up for generations and generations in the world. Most notably known for I think, therefore I am. JeanJacques Rousseau, in 1772 to 1778. He was Swiss. He believed man was inherently good, moral, and decent. And what that means is that we're born and overall generally a good person. That we're very moral, that we, tend to do the right thing. That government is corrupt, and it has made man corrupt and led man down a bad road. That if it wasn't for government, man would be much better. He said, man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains, meaning that though we are free when we are born, we're not bound by the rules of society and so forth. But as we grow up and we start learning how all the rules of society works and what society says we can and cannot do, that we are continually bombarded with more and more chains that weigh us down and eventually corrupt us. Montesquieu, 1699 to 1755, he was also French. Natural laws control human behavior. Okay. Government should be divided into three parts to prevent the government from becoming too powerful and interfering with these natural laws. Okay. So the natural laws of society will guide us. It will control how we do what we do. And that government shouldn't be allowed to get so big and powerful that it can prevent these natural laws from guiding us. So, sounds familiar. He says it should be divided into three branches to prevent it from becoming so powerful and interfering with this. Just like we have three branches today, our legislative, executive, and judicial. All right, so Voltaire, from 1694 to 1778. Again, he was also French. A lot of French people had a lot of time to sit around and think. He was a playwright and a philosopher. He argued that freedom of speech would allow society to grow and thrive. And also argued for the freedom of religion and press. Wow, do these things also sound familiar to us? That's our First Amendment right. Freedom of speech, religion, and press. And so he believed that if people were allowed to express their ideas about science, religion, philosophy, about anything, then these people, their ideas would play off one another and the society would grow. That new ideas would be harnessed and they would be nurtured so they could grow, and thus making the society grow. New ideas, new inventions, better ways of doing things would all come about out of this. He's known for saying, I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to death your right to say it. Imric de Vittal, 1714 to 1767. It'd have done a lot in 2 years if that was right. Alright, so this guy was Swiss. He was a philosopher and a diplomat. He wrote The Law of Nations. And here's a bit of it. Deliberates and takes resolutions in common, thus becoming a moral person who possesses an understanding and a will particular to herself and is susceptible to the obligations and rights. What this basically is saying, and what he says in the Law of Nations, is that nations take on an identity of themselves. That nations kind of like become people. And this personality is based on the people who live in that nation. Um, just like if you think of it, um, you think of Japan. Well, you can think of kind of what people from Japan are like, and you can think of ideas from Japan. You could think of Russia or China, America, Australia. You think of all these places, and as I say them, you get this idea of what that country is like in your head, because all of these countries take on an identity, thus becoming a moral person. Okay? So, and that's what he's referring to, and this is what he observed over his time as a diplomat. Thomas Hobbes, another very important one, in 1588 to 1678, he was English. He dealt with social contract. Uh, and what he said of the social contract is that it was an agreement between the people of a country and their rulers. Citizens give up some rights in exchange for the security that the rulers provide. So basically what that says is, hey, as a citizen, I'm going to understand that I can do certain things and there's certain things I can't do. However, for me giving that up, you guarantee that you're going to protect me from invaders, protect me from any other harm and danger. Now, granted, you go out and have problems, have a traffic accident or something. That's not the kind of danger they're really protecting you from. But they set up laws and security to give you some protection. And you give up some of your rights. An example of this in the past few years or past several years, if you go to try to fly now, you have to go through a lot of scrutiny, pat downs, x-rays, all sorts of things before you can board a plane. That wasn't, back in the 90s, didn't exist. But because of 2000, of 9/11 in 2001, that happened, and so people were willing to give up some of their rights for the security provided by the government. And something to focus on Thomas Hobbes, a lot of what he says is it has to be an agreement between the two. You have to be careful of the government taking over too much of a citizen's rights. John Locke. Now, I'm talking about this John Locke, not this John Locke. A lot of us probably know this guy off of Lost. Wrong John Locke. It said that there was a contract between people and the government. Okay, him and Hobbes were on a similar page. People agreed to give the government power. Government agreed to meet the needs of the people. Was the first person to claim that the government's power comes from the people they rule. Okay, government's power comes from the people. The government doesn't just have the power to rule. Previously, if you go back in history, China's mandate of heaven that, the gods chose this person to rule, or the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, that they were actually gods. So people had believed that these people had the right to rule. But John Locke said, no, their right to rule comes from the people they rule. Locke was a huge influencer upon the founders of America. Something he wrote, the Second Treatise of Government, was something that was used and that greatly influenced the writers of the Constitution. 1632 to 1704 is when John Locke was. He was English. People have natural rights, and the government's job is to protect these rights. And if a government fails, the people can revoke the contract, which is a revolution. He believed in division of government, freedom of religion, and the rights of minority. And as we've looked, these are some basic principles of the American identity. and if a government fails the people, it can revoke the contract. There's a great line in the Declaration of Independence that when the government no longer meets the needs of the people, it is not only their right but responsibility to throw off said government. Which means when the government is to the point that it doesn't listen to the people should take the government back. So these were all ideas, and this is what led to the American Revolution and the beginnings of America. And we'll talk more about that in depth next time. So until then, deuces!